This is the DRS train.
I'm Peter Brook. I'm joined by Ciaron Smith, Nedzo's F1 Gridbox, and Ace Shield, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. Oh, thank you. So after what was a bit of a dullard of Japan, Bahrain was surprisingly refreshing because we had a lot of strategic variation, a lot of overtakes. There have been better races in the past, but there have definitely been worse, so that wasn't too bad overall.
Yes, I would agree with that, Peter. I think that race was, in fact, a massive step up from the last race. And I think what really characterized this race for me was the strategic variation that we saw, and plenty of battles. I mean, all three compounds were the same as what were used in Japan. They were all used at one point in the race, so the strategies were made pretty interesting, and we had some good degradation too, so lots to talk about.
I would like to point out that this weekend too, after China and Japan, the Pirelli tires were incomprehensible. Because it cannot be that the qualifying tire is the best tire to use in the race. How many laps did he do with Russell? So it must have done more than 20, and when he put it on, it was already 4 laps old. So we're talking about 25, 26 laps on the soft tire at Bahrain, which is known to be a heavy degradation track. Okay, if the soft tire could have done 26 laps, then the mediums could have done 30 laps, and so we're talking about a one-stopper easily being the best strategy. And instead, the only reason we saw a two-stopper was A, because people were afraid of getting undercut, and B, because there was a safety car after midway for the race, which forced everybody to stop again. So I understand the interesting part of the race, that is, we got a very mixed up strategy field, but this isn't due to a healthy Pirelli choice. It is due to Pirelli sucking again. But instead of China and Japan sucking so much to do one stopper, today we got the tires that suck so much they made the race interesting.
Okay, Nedzo, I know before you jump in, I want to just clarify one thing here. So, Ace, you think that the only reason we saw two-stop as the mandatory strategy was because of strategic reasons, and because of reasons like the safety car, which forced the teams to put on a new tire? Are you saying that you think this would have been a one-stop race for most of the field again, had it not been for the safety car? Is that what you're saying?
Not just the safety car, also the undercut threat. Because, okay, we're going to talk about Antonelli immediately. Everybody thinks that the safety car screwed up his strategy, which it did. Yes, he was screwed over by the safety car. But first of all, he was screwed over by the team, because they didn't pit him early enough, and he got undercut by both Verstappen and, most importantly, Ocon. He never overtook Ocon, and he was a midfielder car. Ocon was running 5th place. He would have been fighting with the McLarens and Leclerc at the end of the race if he didn't let the team undercut himself. So, as I see it, the teams got scared that they couldn't do a one-stopper, and they were afraid of the undercut. So everybody went for the safe choice of a two-stopper. In retrospective, a one-stopper was entirely possible. And Antonelli at that point should have just tried to go for a one-stopper, in my opinion.
We'll get to that. I want to let Nedzo jump in before we touch on that.
Yeah, I agree with most of the points being dished out here. That when your competition from a race before is a Japanese Grand Prix, anything is better than what we got last week in terms of entertainment, in terms of action. And yeah, the tire strategy made it at least somewhat interesting. And yeah, we got to see some drivers do well, other drivers bottle in the fastest car, but we'll get to those in due course as well.
Hold on, I don't like what I'm hearing here. Are we saying that this race may have been garbage if it wasn't for the safety car? Because that's what it sounds like. I'm worried now.
Okay.
Is that what we're saying? Are we saying this race would have been a complete waste of time yet again, like last race, had there not been a safety car forcing another stop for most drivers? Is this what we're saying?
In my opinion, the beauty of Bahrain so far was that it was a two-stopper with heavy degradation, so it was a very fine line between doing an undercut and getting punished later on, or
Okay.
not doing an undercut, going for the optimal strategy, and immediately getting punished because you got undercut. So we can go back to 2 years ago, the Bahrain 2023. Alonso's race, what was it? He just went 2 laps longer, just 2 laps longer than the guys in front in the first stint, and then repeated it and under 2 laps longer than the guys in front in the second stint. So in the last stint, he had 4 laps of tire advantage, and that allowed him to overtake everybody. You know, he had the better car, but instead of going for the undercut, he decided to go for the optimal strategy, and the optimal strategy rewarded him immensely at the end. This race, going longer, Verstappen had no advantage going longer. Antonelli had no advantage going longer. This strategy literally was either you make a one-stop work, which is the optimal strategy in my opinion, or you do a two-stopper trying to undercut everybody before they undercut you. That was the strategy in my opinion. Going longer to save up tires made literally no difference.
Fascinating. Yeah, it did look like that, didn't it? And some teams got it wrong when the safety car came out as well. Should we go team by team? Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. So we'll begin with McLaren, who rather unsurprisingly won it because all through practice they were obviously faster than everyone else. Not that you necessarily know it from Lando's lap times across a lot of the weekend. But yeah, Piastri, very good, very clinical victory. Fast all weekend, pole, leads from the front. Bada boom, bada boom. Lando, that was interesting. P6, and then good start with a out of position penalty for that, and then locks up trying to pass Leclerc. Just about salvages it to finish third. He's kept the title lead, but made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Yeah, I mean, Lando did not have his finest weekend, but he always seems to make a little mistake at some point during a weekend. So he said it himself. He doesn't really know how he's leading the championship, and frankly speaking, he won't be leading it for long if he doesn't clean up his act, because he qualified 6th in the fastest car, and he made a bit of a mess of the initial part of the race when, like you said, he work of passing Hamilton and Leclerc. He ran wide, locked up, and then finally made his way through. And despite all of that, he still didn't manage to pass the Mercedes at the end, so he finished third. So it's a good result because Piastri dominated and we barely saw him in the race, but Lando underperformed. There's no question about that. So it could have been better for McLaren. It could have been a 1-2 instead it was a 1-3. And they need to close these results out. You can't really. I don't think you can win a title if you make mistakes like that consistently. So work to do for Norris.
I'll tell you what irks me about Lando Norris. You look through the champions and the championship contenders of history, even the guys who were supposedly undeserved, even if they weren't really like your guys, like, for example, Jacques Villeneuve, who won the title in the fastest car, but wasn't the best driver over the season. He managed to just about, not even just scrape his way through, obviously, Schumacher had a disqualification in Jerez, but throughout 1997, obviously I wasn't born for that season, so I wouldn't know, but he didn't really make many major mistakes from what I remember. He had a couple of great performances, but didn't make many mistakes. He was just kind of pedaling his way through, consistently getting more points than the guys around him, even if he wasn't the fastest car by a country mile, even if there were better drivers like Schumacher and other guys. And you look through, like, Villeneuve's 1997 is a good example. I'm trying to think of other times where the best driver the driver who won the championship wasn't necessarily the best driver of the season. Prost in 93, for example. You look at those guys, they just didn't make mistakes and just consistently proved throughout the season that they could do it. And with Lando Norris, it's like every single weekend he makes some sort of error that puts him down. Obviously, this weekend we saw him both in qualifying and then in the race. We saw in China in the sprint he made errors. We've seen in what was the race before that in Japan was that was just bad from both McLarens. I've got the races the wrong way around. And then in Australia, you could argue that was kind of a Villeneuve performance because he was in the fastest car in a car that was great on the tyres in the wet, that handled really well in the wet conditions, and just about beat Verstappen, who's in a much inferior car. So I guess you could say 1 out of 4 races, he's done a performance that you at least half expect from a champion. And it's so annoying because like we've been known on this podcast for kind of half bashing Lewis Hamilton because he could only win in the fastest car, but at least he could win in the fastest car. Like you look at, as I say, you look at Hamilton, like his winning percentage at Mercedes when he finished was probably about 70, maybe 80%. Lando, since McLaren became the fastest team in the middle part of, or in the first part of 2024, he's had about 20 races in the fastest car. He's won 5 of them. That's not a good conversion rate, and he needs to start actually proving his consistency. Otherwise, Oscar, who's now proving he's got that little bit less pace overall, but he's starting to deliver more consistency. If Oscar can deliver on a more consistent basis, he's going to overtake Lando for the title. And even Oscar Piastri would be a better champion than Lando, even though he would still be one of the worst champions in history. He'd still be better than Lando, whatever Lando performs this year.
Lando has been saying for, I think, since China, I didn't really keep track of it. Anyway, he's been saying that the current McLaren doesn't suit his style. And so that's the reason why he's unable to match what Piastri is doing. Now, that's what Lando is saying, so I take it at face value. It's not like Lando is saying very bright things lately. So take it with a pinch of salt. Rather, about McLaren, I think it is worth pointing out that, yes, it is absolutely the best car, but half of its advantage is being squandered through no fault of their own. So the current McLaren is both faster than the other teams by about 2 times of a second, and also handles the tire better. The moment that Pirelli is screwing up and the races become this no degradation of what it is, yes, that's half of McLaren's advantage that's gone, because degradation is no longer a problem for anybody. So the advantage McLaren has over everybody else in degradation has not been important since the start of the year. So the only advantage it effectively has is being 2 tenths a lap faster than the immediately behind car, which I think is Mercedes at this point. And so, just 2 tenths faster than the Mercedes, yes, I can see why they aren't as dominating as they should be.
Well, see, this is the thing. I understand the points about the tyre, and those are pretty valid, half of the advantage being lost. But when it comes to Lando himself, you look at the generational talents, your Schumachers, your Verstappens, your Hamiltons, they like a certain type of car. Schumacher always liked a car that turned at the front end massively and he could control it mid-corner. But he drove cars that didn't do that, and he took them to race wins and he took them to fantastic results. The Jordan in 1991, he didn't qualify 7th in that car because it turned the way he wanted it to. He drove that car because he's a truly generational talent. Even guys like Hamilton, for example, have produced good performances in cars that weren't fully adapted to their styles. Verstappen the same in the 2016 Red Bull. You could argue the pre wide body regulations Red Bulls and Toro Rossos, they weren't fully geared towards his driving style because he wasn't the number 1 driver in the team at that point. That, like, you're truly generational talents. They don't need the car to be yes, to completely dominate. They need the car to be to their preferences, but they don't need everything. They don't need everything. That just proves that Lando is flawed. People giving him concessions and exceptions, saying, "Oh, it's his first championship season in a title-winning car," and it's like, no, he's had 7 years of experience. He doesn't get to have that excuse when you have that much experience in Formula One, and it's. I want to be able to give someone concessions for a situation that I'm known for giving drivers a lot more plaudits than people think they deserve, because they make errors that weren't exactly, or they have things that weren't their fault. But Lando, there's hardly any ways to defend him now, because when you have a car that's sort of hard to handle, you'll get drivers that make 1 or 2 errors. Like Verstappen did probably burn through his tyres a bit too much in Australia, and that's why he couldn't challenge for the lead. Other drivers, like even you, as I said, your Schumachers, your Hamiltons, have made mistakes in dominant cars because not everyone is absolutely perfect. But there's a difference between a Schumacher or a Hamilton getting 70, 80, 90% of the wins instead of 100, and Lando getting 20%, 30% of the wins, and in terms of the overall results he could have got. He could have won Australia. He could have won China. He could have won Japan. And he could have won this race had he just delivered what the car can deliver. And he didn't. and that's the be all and end all. If McLaren, if it's Piastri who wins this title this year, they have to consider either A, getting rid of Norris, or B, making him the undisputed number 2 driver, and he won't accept that.
Nedzo, the only fault I see in your reasoning is that you're trying to compare Norris with all these great drivers. And I'm not. I'm saying what I said about a driver who's between the level of a good driver or a very good driver like Coulthard, Barrichello, Massa, where I think we should compare Norris to these drivers. And so compared to these drivers, yes, they aren't always at the top of their game. They only have their days where they are good enough to really battle the Michael Schumachers, the Lewis Hamiltons. So I compare Norris to these drivers, and so I think the comparison shouldn't be, is he a generational talent? No, he's not. I think the question is he the kind of driver that deserves a top team, or should he just be good enough for a midfield team and that's it? I think that's the comparison we should be making at this point.
Okay, let's compare him to his peers. You mentioned guys like Barrichello, like Massa, and guys like that, and there is that way. I don't even think he's on that level, because guys like Barrichello and Bottas, for example, I'll give the example of, and even guys like Webber were consistently good as a second driver. Like Bottas was always, even if like 2020 was a bit embarrassing and 2021 was a bit embarrassing, he was constantly second, third place, just racking up consistent points. Same with Barrichello. Obviously, Massa was less, so he was a bit more happy-go-lucky. But let's compare Lando to his direct peers, guys like George Russell, guys like Charles Leclerc, guys like, okay, let's not put Alex Albon in that list, because although he was that rookie in the same year, he's not really performed to the levels that we expect. Guys like Russell this year is performing arguably the best, if not inarguably the best of his entire career. He's the most consistent driver behind Max. He's the best driver behind Max, in my opinion, and has performed really maturely and delivered when he's now come out of the shadows of a fantastic driver and is showing what he can deliver as a number 1 driver. Leclerc has just come into a team with that same driver that George has just gone up against, and he's delivering. Obviously, we know Hamilton's going to take a lot of time to adapt, but he's absolutely clearing him out of the water. These other guys have a lot, like Russell has had a lot more worse circumstances. Charles Leclerc right now is in much worse circumstances than Lando is when it comes to teammates and when it comes to peers and when it comes to all this sort of stuff. Like, if Lando, like, this is how Lando performs when he's up against a very cool customer, a guy who, Piastri isn't going to be very political, Piastri isn't going to be very detrimental to the team, not very stingy. Imagine if he went up against someone like a Hamilton. Imagine if he went against someone who's actually like a Hamilton, a Verstappen, any of those. In terms of politics, those guys like an Ocon, maybe, because he's more political despite being a more midfield driver, or an Alonso because he's now closer to that level than he is at top level now. Imagine if he went up against that, because he'd just crumble. How can you have the mental fortitude to only just perform when everything is geared towards you? You've got a good car, you've got a friendly team situation, if not perfect. How can you do that?
I just want to say I completely agree with all the points being made, and I want to touch on something quickly that Nedzo said, which is that, if Lando is to be compared with some of those other so-called, I don't want to use this word, but let's say discounted champions or lesser champions, or weaker champions, however you want to call it, I consider them all great drivers. Look at Jacques Villeneuve and look at Damon Hill and look at how competitive they were. Even when Jacques Villeneuve had a bad race weekend, he didn't go to the media and say, when I was growing up, I never thought that I would be better than George and Charles and Max, so it's weird for me that I'm racing them and beating them. Can you imagine Jacques Villeneuve saying that about Michael Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen? Can you imagine Damon Hill, who told David Coulthard that he should watch his mouth one time when DC was making a joke at Damon's expense at Williams? And Damon confronted him almost physically and told him, don't you ever talk like that again. And DC said, I got scared. It tells you that those guys, even though they didn't have the pace of Michael or Mika, they were wired to win. Jacques was so competitive. He would even play mind games with Michael. It's what drove Michael mad. That Jacques would go to the media and say things that would make everybody agitated. At least those guys wanted the title, and they didn't make excuses that you'd expect some team to make, and that's part of the problem with Lando too. I don't think he has a champion's mentality. I really don't. And it's a problem because he can't continue like this and expect to win a title, but we'll see.
Yeah, he keeps laying on his errors and weaknesses quite heavily because Oscar, by comparison, is in his third season and already looks ready for the title. I mean, in the first race, he was chasing Lando and clearly wanted to get past him. They both went off together at turn 13. His came off slightly worse, but even then, he was able to reverse out without beaching the car and not triggering a safety car. So even though it was a very minor mistake, he was able to kind of make something of it. And other than that, he's been basically flawless. So yeah, it's not going to be long before he overtakes Lando, because Lando, as well as making mistakes, he keeps kind of hanging on them and keeps emphasizing, oh, it's just not good enough for me, or I'm doing this wrong, or blah, blah, blah. And Oscar doesn't really do that. And for the moment, he's ironed himself out, because last year there were some races like Mexico or wherever where he was just sucking for no reason, and it's easy to say, oh, well, he's less experienced or something. But now that seems to have gone. And it's looking it's really hard to make predictions when you're only 4 races in, because Max had a garbage weekend but then won last week somehow. But it feels like the title's already going to Piastri at this point.
Sure, I can see that. We know McLaren have the fastest car, so Lando still has a chance to win this title. It's just that based on these 4 races, it just looks like he hasn't learned as much as we thought he had last year. Could that change? Of course it could change. But we can only make our comments based on the evidence that has been presented 4 races in. So we may have another podcast and change our views later. But I stand by what I'm saying anyways. I think our points are well founded as of now in the season.
Okay. Ace?
I was just going to say, since we're speaking of title campaign, what do you think of George? Because currently I think he's very much still in the title fight.
I can answer that one quickly. We could talk about Mercedes in general if we want as well. It could be a good transition to Mercedes because they had a good race with George, and Antonelli had good pace and didn't have the luck under the safety car that maybe some others had. But to answer your question, Ace, I think that George has been, if not the best, the second best driver in Formula One this season so far. He has been exceptional in qualifying, exceptional in the races, and he's become the true team leader that Mercedes wanted when Lewis left. So this guy is the real deal, and I even think that I honestly am starting to think he's even better than Charles Leclerc, but Charles and George are close, and I think we need to start asking another question before we get into Mercedes' race, which is, who is the best qualifier in Formula One? Because it's always default Leclerc, and I don't know if that's true. I think Leclerc may have the most speed of any driver, and that he may be able to do a lap that no one else can do every 10 races. I actually think George Russell is perhaps the best qualifier in Formula One right now. This guy is just a machine, and in the race, he had like so many issues come up. His brake-by-wire failed. His DRS was faulty. His telemetry went down, and he still held off Norris at the end to finish second. I think he also had some like brake pedal issues as well. So it showed us that he could still deliver even when a lot of things are not going his way. And then his teammate had a great race too. He was stuck in dirty air early on. But I think he showed his experience a little bit. I think the first thing he did was what Antonelli did was when he pitted, he pushed really hard on his outlaps to try and regain position. And I think he ruined his tires a little bit. He took too much out of them. And then, he was on that 3-stop strategy, and the safety car came out, and it just ruined his strategy because then he pitted again, and it put him down the order. And from there, he just didn't make up as many places as he wanted. So that's what dropped him out of the top 10, and he came close to passing Behrman, but not quite. So I think positive, Mercedes had the second quickest car, and both drivers were on the pace. So I think Antonelli just got a bit unlucky with the safety car, but if I'm Toto Wolff, it was promising.
Yeah, I think George is really relishing being the undisputed team leader now. When it comes to quali pace, it's easy enough to say Leclerc. I mean, it kind of depends on the car, because this car is not brilliant from Ferrari. George was an insane qualifier in the Williams, but then his teammate was Nicholas Latifi. And against Mercedes, even though he has most of the time been better than Lewis in quali, it's still, we didn't really notice it so much. It didn't seem to stand out because it was already a competitive car. He wasn't like dragging well above where it should be. But now, in the qualifying championship, he's fourth. He's only 27 points behind Piastri. And in the real championship, he's still up there and is kind of doing well through consistency. There could be a win or two this year. I mean, I don't know if they'll have any races where they're obviously the fastest, but I think that's definitely plausible. And Antonelli, the strategy didn't help him, and he was otherwise doing well. His points average has dropped a bit, so now he's only 40th in the all-time rankings from 15th or something he was before the race. But Mercedes things are going quite well for them at the moment.
My take on the best driver in qualifying right now, I wouldn't go for either Leclerc or Russell. I'd still go for Max. Because although Max isn't known for his qualifying pace. Everyone always talks about his racecraft, not racecraft, but his race management and his race pace. But in my opinion, it's a similar situation to what we have or what we had in the 2010s. Because I've always said, when it comes to Formula One eras and stuff, you have a driver or two drivers from every era who is clearly a level above the rest. In the 50s, it was Fangio. In the 60s, it was Clark and Hill. In the 70s, it was Stewart and Lauda. In the 80s, it was Prost and Senna. In the 90s, it was Senna and Schumacher. In the 2000s, it was Schumacher, and then in the latter part of the decade, it was more of a kind of balanced field. In the 2010s, it was Hamilton, Alonso, Raikkonen, and Vettel, and they were all kind of not really. At points, they were better than each other, but not overall. You can argue they weren't really much clear of each other. Now, there's a problem where there's no generational qualifier anymore. They're all really good. Like your Verstappens, your Leclercs, your Russells. They're not. You could. There's literally probably in terms of pure qualifying pace, even in terms of Norris when he's at his peak, you could put in there. There's only about maybe a tenth and a half between them on the top level. So it's really tough. This is the same. Maybe it's because nowadays the field spread has become so small, the car has become so refined that the differences between drivers become less obvious. I don't think we'll ever see a situation like, for example, 1994, where, obviously we had Sergio Perez last year, but I don't think we'll ever see a situation where drivers are qualifying 2 seconds off their teammate just because the cars aren't that hard to drive anymore, unless the cars become more difficult to drive. I don't think we'll ever see gaps like that again. Between teammates specifically, not between the whole grid, because that's the good thing about field spread. It means that you get more competitive racing, and it means that you don't get back marker teams 6 seconds off the pace with no chance of getting any points. But back to Mercedes. I don't think George is the best qualifier, but he's certainly, I'd say second best. I'd say second best in qualifying, second best overall driver on the grid. Basically, if Max is 100% of everything, George is 99%. He just doesn't have that last X factor to absolutely destroy everyone. Although I believe because he hasn't had the full chance to prove himself in a title-winning car, he could do that when he gets into a title-winning car. We know he's very clinical. We know he's very surgical with his kind of inputs and stuff like that. So, but then again, maybe he might do what Max does, which is just whenever he gets into a wheel-to-wheel battle, just turn into Al Qaeda. We don't know. But yeah. I'd say George's race was very good. It was a typical George 2025 race. Just solid, nice and calm. Obviously, Antonelli did get stiffed. I wasn't fully paying attention to the race at some points, I'll be frankly honest. And I looked up at one point, I was like, why is Antonelli there? It was around 30. It was around, I think, just before the safety car came out. And I was like, why is Antonelli there? And yeah, obviously, if it's the case that Kimi was just stiffed by strategy, then fair enough. But yeah, great promise from Mercedes, and they are definitely the second best team. I have a feeling they could have a season like maybe not a 2004 BAR, maybe like what they did in 2023, where they don't win a race. Because I think if it's going to be the case, I think McLaren are going to win most races. But if they don't, I think it'll be Max and Red Bull that have the chance to properly deliver. I have a feeling that we're going to have a 2004 BAR, 2023 Mercedes style season where we have a team finish second in the constructors without getting any wins. And if they do scrape a win, it'll be because both McLarens bottle it and because Max's car just isn't capable on that day. But George is doing really well. George is proving that beating Hamilton was no joke and that he's the real deal.
Well said. Well said. Ace, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think everything was said correctly. I don't have anything to add. Antonelli unlucky, Russell did a great job, and I honestly believe that so the only weakness this Mercedes has might be the slow corners. That's it. So for Imola or Spain, I don't know which race, but Mercedes and many other teams are gonna bring upgrades before the 1st of June. And so if that changes the pecking order, I think George is a contender for the title.
Interesting.
Isn't there talk as well that I think apparently Mercedes have a huge engine advantage from 2026 as well, which
Oh
with their
yeah,
past,
that's
with their past history of
This-
engine advantages, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But yeah,
basically. Okay, let me start. Aside from the rumors up until now that have kept saying that Mercedes had an advantage, there was the rumor yesterday by Formula Uno Analytica, which basically said they talked with a top manager at a team which was client of Mercedes, and this top manager told them that Mercedes had a huge advantage. So that's the most recent rumor, and basically it is expected Mercedes to dominate next year because Audi and Red Bull appear to be just behind in development. I think it is understood that Ferrari went not for synthetic fuels but for biofuels, and that road is not as rewarding as the synthetic fuels. So also Ferrari is out of the contention. And then there is Honda, which since it is based entirely in Japan, there is hardly any crosswalk between engineers, so nobody knows how Honda is at the moment.
This is when we'll find out
Oh.
that. I was going to say, this is when we'll find out that Mercedes were actually starting their engine development in 2019, just like they did with the last regulations.
Yes, that brings back memories,
Mhm.
mostly unpleasant. So, having said that, Ferrari still look pretty quick this year. They have a quick car, perhaps not as quick as Mercedes this weekend, but not far off. And they both started on the medium tires, not the softs. And so I think right off the bat they were struggling, weren't they? At the start, I mean, Leclerc got passed by Russell, and then I think both drivers pitted again under the safety car, and that helped move Hamilton up the order. And it was weird. They were really good on the hard tire at the end, so they came home fourth and fifth after battling with lots of drivers. But I think ultimately you need a little bit more speed. Like the car is good, but it's not. I don't think it was as good as Mercedes this weekend, and I think it was definitely not as good as the McLaren. So yeah.
So very interesting was Lewis Hamilton comments after the race. I'll just try to read them from this Italian article, so I'll have to translate on the fly. Okay, this is Marco.
But he said he learned something, didn't he? He said he learned something
Yes,
from
he
this
said
weekend.
that, but he also
I'll let
said
you read the quote.
so about the start to this year. He's saying, "I did not expect that it would go so badly effectively. I did not think that these would have been my performances and that my ability to adapt to the car would be so negative. But it's all right. I will not give up. I will continue to push and try to learn with the new car." Then to the British media, he continues that as human beings, we are blocked by our habits. And since I drove for the same team for such a long time, at a different car, I have to learn a different style and lots of new setups of driving. For example, I'm using the engine braking, which I had never used before. And even the brakes are very different. Here at Ferrari, they use Brembo, while I, in the last 15 years, have used Carbon Industry. Then he says this car requires a very, very different driving style, and so I'm adapting. And it is clear that Charles is able to start the weekend with a certain setup and to keep it through the weekend, while I instead am just being changing it all over the place. And even when I conform to Charles' setup, I just find everything all over the place. So yes, I need to do another step forward. I know that I can do it, and I will do it. And next week, I will try to start from a better point without changing very much the setup. I think I understand what this car wants to be driven, and so I will try to apply these learnings for the next race.
Wow. And I think another thing that he needs to probably is realizing is that Italian teams work very differently to Anglo-Saxon ones, and I don't know if he likes that because he just looks a little bit lost with the setup and a little bit annoyed with his lack of progress. But I'm sure he'll get there. I just don't know if he can. I said this at the beginning of the season. Charles Leclerc has been there for so long now. He's been there since 2019. So this would be his 7th year, so 8th season. And at the end of the day, Leclerc has a huge advantage that it's going to be hard to make that up in one season. So lots of steep learning curve for Lewis ahead, but if anybody can do it, he can. But he's clearly behind Leclerc in pace right now.
Yeah, he does need to improve, especially in qualifying, because I think I can't remember what the gap was in Bahrain, but it was at least a handful of tenths. And yeah, I mean, obviously we'll talk about setups. I mean, if he's using Leclerc setups, obviously he's going to be a bit all over the place because Leclerc is definitely a more aggressive driver. I'm not sure if he's smooth oversteer or aggressive oversteer, but he's definitely on the oversteer side, and Lewis is smooth understeer, so he's a complete opposite of any sort of aggressive driving style. So he would never. I don't think his setup. You could alter Leclerc's setups, give himself a bit more front end turning, and maybe it'll make it a bit better. But yeah, he's not doing a horrendous job, Lewis. No, it's not like Perez 2024, that sort of level, or Damon Hill 1999 for ex-champions going to another team. But he does need to really sort of start to show signs of improvement, because I think this is the 4th race of the season. We usually give drivers 5 races to get adapted to the car. Maybe we can extend that to 10, because there are some drivers that are clearly struggling due to factors either outside of our control or that we can't see, like Carlos Sainz, for example. We'll give them at least until the summer break, I'd say, to properly adapt. But yeah, Lewis, at the moment, he's just, I think, lacking confidence, lacking the raw pace that he has shown in glimpses across his career. And also, we can briefly mention that he got driver of the day, which, I mean, we've had some bad calls in the past couple of races for driver of the day. I can't exactly remember which ones they were, but there was talk about this a couple of weeks ago about driver of the day and who got it. I can't remember who it was now, but it, like, how? And then when I saw someone on Twitter saying that anyone who says that Lewis Hamilton didn't deserve driver of the day is doing it because of one reason and one reason only, trying to hint at racism, and it's like, come on.
So talking about Charles, I read yesterday an analysis about the qualifying and why there was the difference between Charles and Lewis. And so, first of all, from the telemetry, you can see that Lewis is losing in every corner of the track. And he's losing especially in the high-speed corners. The writer of the article said that Lewis is able to do better lines for the corner, and simply he's losing to Leclerc because he does not have the same cornering speed. Lewis Hamilton does not have the confidence that Leclerc has, and so he's not able to do the same minimum speeds at the corners that Charles is able to do. But otherwise, Lewis Hamilton is doing a better technical lines, and that actually explained the pole position in China in the sprint, because from the telemetry, China has only one high-speed corners that you need to rely on the car, and that is the last turn. Everything else are either completely secure high-speed corners, or they overwhelmingly rely on the technical lines. Like turn 1 and turn 2 and turn 3 in China, it is heavily reliant on the technical lines. And Lewis Hamilton that day was gaining on everybody through those turns simply by doing better lines that nobody else was able to take. And so he kept that advantage throughout the lap, and that advantage was almost completely annihilated in the last corner, which Hamilton could not do at the same cornering speed of everybody else due to this lack of confidence. And so the day after, Leclerc tried to replicate the lines Lewis was doing for turn 1 and turn 2 and turn 3, and he beat Lewis Hamilton the day after, because now there was no longer that advantage, for example. And he also, the writer hints at some comments that Leclerc made. For example, once in Q3, after the first lap, the engineer asked Charles if he wanted a few more ticks on the front end. And Charles said, no, I have to trust the car. What does it mean? It means that the current Ferrari has the limit, which is beyond what the driver feels. So the driver, to go to the limit of the car, has to go beyond his instinct of the limit, because if it's not there, the car has more. But then it also means the driver has to throw the car into the corner without the confidence that it would stick. He has to trust the car, but he does not actually feel the limit of the car. So that's the reason why Charles is able to corner higher than Lewis in these corners. It is because Charles has understood that the limit of the car is beyond, and he's going beyond. Lewis is not currently at the moment.
Yep, that explains a lot. If you don't have that confidence, if you don't have that knowledge, you can't get the most out of the car. And that brings us to Red Bull, I think, because both drivers couldn't get the best out of the car and complained they had no grip or pace on the hard tires, especially Max. So their problems continue.
Yeah, that's quite a big turnaround turnaround for Max at least, I guess, from last week, somehow pulling that win out of his arse, and this time a week, one of the relatively rare weekends when the car is actually bad, and also he knows it and just gets annoyed because it wasn't going well. He was complaining about brakes. He then pitted and for the hard tires and ended up dead last, and then pitted again, and then kind of was okay, had okay pace towards the end, but this was way off, like kind of fourth, fifth fastest territory. Tsunoda was actually better in his second weekend with the team. He made it to Q3. He was slower than Max, but still there or thereabouts, got in the points. So from his perspective, it was good. But for the team, they're clearly not. They don't have the tools needed to fight for the title, even if occasionally there's going to be some bursts of performance.
So many things went wrong. I mean, first of all, there's just been general braking and imbalance issues on both cars, which exacerbated their tire degradation issues. Then they also had issues with the pit gantry. Something was causing a problem with the traffic light. And there were also those electrical issues impacted the race. And then ultimately, it's just the weekend exposed the weaknesses that they have on the car and as a team. So it doesn't surprise me that Max Verstappen's manager was yelling at Helmut Marko apparently quite heavily after the race. So Max is not happy.
I thought that Ferrari 17 years ago taught us why you shouldn't use traffic lights for your pit gantry. Like, just use a bloody lollipop man who's got eyes.
Yep, absolutely. So sometimes the old ways are best.
So before talking about the race, let's talk about the comment there about Max's manager, because it is recent news that the only way that Max can break the contract, well, legally, of course, they can always settle on a payment to break it if they really want to, but technically, there are performance clauses, and it appears that the performance clause in Verstappen's contract currently is being fourth or worst in the standings by the summer break. And so if that happens, they can invoke some performance clause to break the contract. And from what Formula One Insider is saying, is that Verstappen is actually ready to talk with Mercedes, but only if Mercedes does the first step. So if Mercedes approaches Verstappen.
It's an interesting one, and maybe, there's more going on behind the scenes. I mean, Max is not, he's not the kind of guy to want to finish fourth. He drove, again, so aggressively today. He passed Pierre Gasly on the last lap. I don't think Max is going to be the kind of driver that wants to finish lower so he can invoke a clause in a contract. He'll try to win every race. Interesting that they would want Mercedes to approach. That seems like an interesting strategy. But I could definitely see him talking to other teams if this team doesn't turn it around, because this car should not be challenging for a title in the way that it's doing, and only because of Max's incredible talent, driving talent. Is that is that the case currently? So Red Bull are firmly the fourth best car right now in Formula One, and that's just probably not what Max Verstappen is looking for. He considers himself to be the best driver. Why would he stay in a team that's giving him the fourth best car with no prospects of improving, having lost several great team members? So I could see him discussing a move with other teams if this keeps up.
I've got two interesting points about that summer break clause. Obviously, it's by the summer break, so technically, is that saying that if he is fourth at the summer break, he can then terminate the contract immediately, or is it at the end of the season? And then, second of all, to be fair, Mercedes is a good option, but then again, you've got the driver dilemma of who do you replace? Because if you replace Antonelli, you're replacing the rookie who's done a decent job and doesn't deserve to be dropped. And if you replace George, you're replacing the very, very, very good lead driver he's been loyal to you all these years, and then he's finally got a chance to be in a team leading role, and then he gets dropped. So Mercedes is a good option on paper for Verstappen, obviously, because it's a better team than he's currently in now, and he's got a solid foundation, it's got manufacturer support and all the good stuff. But it doesn't have the logistically, Mercedes will be in a massive trouble trying to sort it out, because it's a case of Max will probably want Antonelli as his teammate because he'll be less of a threat and all that sort of stuff. But then Russell will be the better driver for the team, and also Russell, I think, would be the bigger prospect right now, especially in the short term, to lose. And Russell could easily just go the other way to Red Bull and try and build them back up, or he could go to somewhere else. I think an interesting prospect. I was asked in another server what my ideal / semi-realistic 2027 grid lineup would be, and my 2027 grid lineup had Verstappen replacing Norris at McLaren at some point, because I have a feeling that if McLaren were to pull a 1996 Williams move and quote unquote fire Norris before the season starts, even though it wouldn't be before the season starts, it would be midway through the season for the next season, because he's not performing. If we get to the summer break and let's say Piastri's beating Norris by like 50 points, McLaren could easily bin off Norris and bring in Verstappen, and then they know that they're going to have a driver who's going to push them and get every single title for the next 5 billion years. And Verstappen will accept being in the fastest car. Or Verstappen could ditch off his current contract and just not race in F1 anymore. Because if he doesn't go to Red Bull, if he doesn't go to Mercedes, if he doesn't go to McLaren, where's he going to go to? Aston Martin? They're still awful, and Alonso's still there. So he could easily go off, do WEC, try and get a triple crown of motorsports, just do sim racing in his living room, because he doesn't. Although yes, he's a winner, and when he's competing, he wants to win. He doesn't have that same drive to get 100 race wins that Lewis did, the same way that Schumacher did. He doesn't. F1 isn't everything to him. He has other hobbies. He has other things that he wants to do. I could easily see him going and getting Le Mans and then thinking, screw it, why not go for the Indy 500 as well and just see if I can do it. I can see him doing that. It would be interesting to see, because although Red Bull's in a better situation than they were even 2 races ago, not because of the car performance, but because now I think Tsunoda is now maybe not the solution to the problem that Red Bull have with a second driver, but he's at least as good as 2019 Gasly was, where he's not near Verstappen in terms of performance, but he's not getting horrendously bad results that will completely destroy the team's constructors' ambitions. Like, if he keeps getting like 1 or 2 positions below what Verstappen is, I have a feeling that they'll finish considerably fourth in the standings, because Ferrari have a good driver lineup, Mercedes have a good car, and McLaren have got the best car. But they'll now finish. They won't because like last year, if they'd have had this car, I think they'd have struggled to finish fourth because of Perez, because Perez would have scored no points throughout the entire year, and they'd have struggled to beat Alpine, and they'd have struggled to beat other guys. But now I think they're good enough to get fourth. But yeah, contract talks and stuff like that is entertaining.
I think that's precisely what you said about the Mercedes drivers. That's precisely the reason why Verstappen wants Mercedes to take the first step in the negotiations. It's because currently Mercedes is perfectly set. The lineup is perfectly fine for the team. Russell is doing a perfectly fine job. Antonelli looks promising enough. Putting Verstappen would disrupt more the team than what he would gain from getting Max Verstappen. That's what it looks like at the moment. So yeah, it would be very interesting, because honestly, right now it is not a given that if Verstappen goes to Mercedes, that it would be in the place of Russell. Currently it would make for an incredible lineup to have Russell and Verstappen at the same team. And so, is Mercedes willing to give up Antonelli? Yeah, it's why it's so interesting, this current market scenario, because the only option that Verstappen has is this very ideal one, which is not ideal for every party involved. Anyway, about instead the performance of the Red Bull, I just want to point out that every other year we had this similar situation, 2012, 2003, back in 1996, where there were cars contending for the title that weren't the best. I really like to point out that we finally saw another example of the one time these cars don't put everything together, things go badly, incredibly quickly and incredibly badly. As we saw today, Verstappen barely managed to finish ahead of the midfielder car. So I really want people to keep this race in mind, because whenever Verstappen is not doing these performances, it is basically outdriving the car, because the car deserves this kind of performances on a pure race base.
Max is in an interesting position where he can go anywhere, but also can't at the same time, because any of the midfield teams would take him in a heartbeat, but he's not going to go there. But then the other three front runners, there's just not. They're pretty locked in with their drivers, because Mercedes. Okay, so he could replace Kimi, yes, because Kimi is quite new to the team, and I have little doubt that eventually he's going to get sucked into Ferrari. But Max and George famously don't get on. Max is going to go in there wanting to make the team all about him, when that's what George has been doing, and rightfully so. But then if he replaces George, it's like, well, that shows what loyalty there is from Toto, that to get rid of George just like that, just to bring Max in. And Max would love that, because he gets to be undisputed team leader, and Antonelli's going to be a good little boy and do what he's told and whatnot. Ferrari is not going to change, because, well, Lewis is going to be there for at least 2 years probably, and Charles is going to be there as long as he can. Theoretically, McLaren, if Lando keeps messing up like this and they decide to get rid of him, you never know. They could give Max a go, put him in there with Oscar, which would be interesting. But also, Max probably is considering that he's near the tail end of his career now, because he's been doing this for 10 years. The 2050 Formula One champion is coming in a few months, and I imagine that will change his priorities as well once he's got a family to think about instead of a sim rig. So he's been very vocal that he won't be on the grid by 2030. He's becoming quite tired of the amount of races they're doing and the amount of traveling. So I think he might just get sick of it once he's well, I've got 5 titles and X amount of wins. Let's just call it quits and go home and play iRacing for the rest of my life.
Another option I have in mind for Verstappen would be Alpine, because next year Alpine has the Mercedes engines, and at Alpine, well, they're backed by Renault, so they have the budget to pay Verstappen whatever he wants, and they have Briatore, who is shrewd enough to actually go for Verstappen if he can. So, and last time there was the rule change in 2022, if it weren't for the engine, the Alpine had a chassis as good as the Red Bull, the Ferrari. So if it weren't for the engine, the Alpine would have been fighting for the wins at the start of 2022. And now, new year, new set of rules in 2026, they're going to have what it looks like the best engine. So if they do as good a job as they already did in the past, well, Alpine may very well start next year fighting for the wins, especially if they actually manage to get Verstappen.
I mean, that would most certainly solve the Doohan issue, even if Doohan was to survive until the end of the year. Or we talk about this summer break clause, it would be audacious to bring him in mid-season and then leave Red Bull in a situation where they have to promote either Lawson or Hadjar. That would be a very peculiar situation to be in. Obviously, I think it wouldn't happen. I think we'd have to wait until the start of 2026. Would Verstappen do it? Obviously, it's a works team. Well, it's not even a works team anymore. It's a manufacturer-backed operation. We can say that instead. It's got big manufacturer support. It's got big money involved. You could easily see Verstappen taking, like, I don't know, he could fleece Flavio for 100 million a year. He could definitely do that. It would be interesting. Would he have the final faith in it, though? I'm not sure, because it's like, I'm not sure. Because, like, if you're going to go for the big money move, the big everything, you're going to go for Aston Martin, because the money will be bigger, because Lawrence Stroll can pay out of his own pockets rather than it being bureaucracy and French people. And he could easily go to Aston Martin because he's got Adrian Newey there. He knows him, and he knows he can make cars that will win him another 8,000 championships. It'll just be the technical side and the facilities side that will let Aston Martin down over Alpine. But yeah, this is the same situation that Carlos Sainz found himself in, because it's like every team is what McLaren was from 1996 until 2002, when they just had Hakkinen and Coulthard and they were happy with it. It's crazy because the Red Bull are pretty haphazard with their lineup, but overall, they're not really relevant to the conversation. Ferrari, yes, we've already established. This just proves how much of a curveball and how much Hamilton's move messed up the transfer market. Because without it, we would have had Leclerc and Sainz at Ferrari, and you could have easily dropped Sainz for Verstappen. Or at Mercedes, you would have had George and Lewis, and maybe Antonelli would have gone to Williams or another Mercedes-backed team, maybe even Alpine. And then you got McLaren, Norris and Piastri at McLaren. So had this been the 2024 driver lineups, it'd either be Sainz at Ferrari who could go for Verstappen, or Norris at McLaren, or Piastri at McLaren on 2024 performance. But you get what I mean. There's a lot there's a lot going on, and that just proves, Lewis's move screwed up the transfer market, and now no one can make any moves apart from between the top teams, so just the top teams switching drivers. But no one can move in or out. It's a very weird structure we've got going on right now, which maybe makes me wonder, should it in 2015, when we were considering having 3-car teams, because the teams were getting low and we weren't sure if Haas were going to join and stuff like that, and we could have even had 9 teams on the grid, would 3-car teams have been a better option than what we have now?
It's just that the caliber of drivers is higher. We have far fewer pay drivers and obvious howlers. They are being more considerate of who they're taking on, because we don't have 5 or 6 teams at the back of the grid who just take whoever can give them the most money and rotate them around depending on when the paychecks come in. So you do get more continuity. In terms of that performance clause, it would be like Vettel's in 2014. It would be activated and then it would expire at the end of the season. So he wouldn't do a mid-season switch to Alpine. I don't, and again, you very rarely get drivers of that caliber who deliberately choose to go to midfield teams on basically the hunch that they might be good the following year. Because with Alpine, who knows? I mean, they're not going to be Alpine much longer as well, because they're moving to Mercedes engines, and the Renault factory is shutting down. So I guess they have to find, unless they just become high tech, they have to find another name and brand identity or whatever.
High tech,
but maybe just that, because otherwise, his options really are very limited for someone like him, because Red Bull is it's a sinking ship, and the car, it's not drivable. And this has been really puzzling me, actually, is that there seems to be constant discussions of struggling because cars don't work with my driving style, and they go to another team and it's like, this is not working. And it's like, well, we've hit a development ceiling, very restricted technical regulations. The cars have never been more similar. This shouldn't really be that tricky. And go back 20 or 30 years, people in crap cars weren't like, oh, it doesn't suit my driving style. It's just that it doesn't do anything. Like, I'm a driver that favors oversteer, but rather than this car understeering, you just turn and nothing happens. Like, it's not that it's like, oh, it would work well for someone who likes understeer. It's just that it's not going to work well for anyone because it's a shit car. And with these, it's like, well, okay, so maybe it's a bit funny on the rear, or it does this you don't like, but those are fairly minor things at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it seems to just be flummoxing a lot of people, because again, like, Sainz is not adjusting at all to that Williams. Lewis, he's getting there, but it's obviously going to take a very long time after, well, nearly 20 years of Mercedes-powered cars as a minimum for him. And even now, Max, it's like suddenly this car doesn't work, which is a very strange circuit for the car not to work at, because Bahrain is the one that they all know inside out, back to front, because they test there all the time. It's the one, okay, hard braking, long straights. It's not the most challenging of circuits to really get around. It's very similar to Catalunya in a lot of ways. But now it's just a big complaint, and I feel like even just 10 years ago, you very rarely heard stories about, oh, driving style doesn't work. It was just, oh, well, the car just isn't as fast as whoever else.
With that, should we move on to the next team?
Probably. Who is the next? Oh, it is Alpine. Okay. Well, yeah. So they had. I mean, I don't know if they brought upgrades this weekend, but I was very surprised by their quality performance, because, well, Gasly made it to Q3. Doohan almost did somehow. In the race, though, the safety car did not work for them. I mean, yeah, Gasly was kind of fell behind 4th to 7th. Doohan was in the points, and then the safety car came just after he pitted for hard tyres, and they already knew the hard tyres sucked, to be honest, because they would have seen what Max was doing with it, and everyone else was going for it. Because let's be honest, when's the C1 ever been a good tyre? And so Doohan lost like 6 positions in the final stint when he looked like he might be able to get his first points. So kind of disappointing, and then he got a penalty for track limits. So it's like, yeah, it just fell apart again, but a better weekend overall, I guess.
I honestly believe that. So at the start of the year, I had made a wish, basically, that the front runners, the midfield teams, would be close enough that occasionally, on specific races, some midfield teams could challenge the front runners. My wish came true because this is exactly what happened in Bahrain. We see that the Alpine worked extremely well in Bahrain, which it already was doing in testing. It's just that the races after Australia, China, Japan, the car just wasn't as good. It isn't suited to those tracks. It is better suited to Bahrain, and we saw it. Alpine was challenging the front runners. Gasly was a pain in the ass for Antonelli and for Verstappen. So clearly, this is exactly what I wished for. And so we're gonna see throughout the year these performances where some midfielders are actually on pace, gonna beat some front runners. I think Doohan got a bit screwed over by the strategy, but overall he's not at the level of Gasly. He's inexperienced, and it is unfortunate that this experience is hindering the team the few moments it can actually score points. Because I don't think how many more races like this Alpine is going to have. They're probably going to have Monaco, Singapore, and which other track? Hungary, maybe Canada. Yeah, that's it. Those are the tracks most similar to Bahrain. And so every other track, Alpine is going to be back to 8th, 7th, 9th best. And so, yeah, excellent job by Gasly, honestly. He did an excellent job even holding up the front runners, qualifying so high. We started from the second row. Good strategy, good calls. Honestly, nothing more to add.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that either. That was absolutely correct, I think, on all points, honestly. I think it's a space to watch, simply put. It's a space to watch.
I think all you can say really about Alpine right now is Gasly good, Doohan bad, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, Doohan's race was weird, wasn't it? He was off Gasly, but he made places during the safety car period, but then he just had a really poor end to the race and got repassed, so didn't do much.
He was on the wrong tyre, as I said, because he just pitted. Like the whole race, he was hovering between kind of 9th and 11th. He was just on that cusp of points the whole time, and he was keeping up. Like he was close to Lewis and that in the first stint. The pace was good, but yeah, it felt like with Antonelli, it fell at the wrong time, and they obviously decided to stick it out because, yeah, like to be honest, the soft tyre shouldn't have lasted for 25 laps or whatever. And even though it gave us this interesting spectacle, we had all 3 compounds running at once at the end. It was just disappointing. But then he also didn't help himself because he got that 5-second time penalty for track limits, which meant he ends up behind Hadjar at the end as well. Just a bit of an annoying one when there was some potential that it could work. It's going to be, I feel like, assuming he lasts the season, it's going to be like Brendan Hartley, where he doesn't have a single clean weekend. He either crashes, the car breaks down, or he gets some kind of engine penalty, or something happens every time.
About the track limits, what happened in this race? Because I think Antonelli got the black, white, and flag after 10 laps or something like that. Verstappen got a black, white flag at the end, and Norris got a black and white flag at the end. Which other driver? Doohan got the penalty. I think there was another couple of drivers who got black and white flags due to track limits. So people had a hard time keeping out the road.
Yeah, it's one of those things that the FIA decided to enforce it this weekend, but some of these places that they get the penalties for, you don't really benefit that much by going off track. So, anyways, that's how it went. So, Alpine, good result with Pierre. I mean, unless Nedzo has anything else to add to that, maybe we should move on to Haas.
The only thing I have to say is with track limits, it's not even particularly to do with Alpine, but track limits. I remember when I can't remember which driver Verstappen got by, and he was like one tire in the gravel, and Crofty and co were talking about, oh, will he get track limits for that? I think that if you go in the gravel, that's already enough of the punishment, and you therefore shouldn't be able to get a penalty if you hit gravel.
Hence why we need more gravel traps. And I mean, it was Logan Sargent who suggested this, I think 2 years ago with Austria, which they've now done, is put a strip of grass and then you can have the runoff. Because if you hit the grass, you're never going to go faster. And so it's like, okay, well, we're not going to give you a penalty because you took your penalty by running onto the grass. Like, it's such basic elements of track design that they don't seem to have remembered. And back in the olden days, maybe they were a bit less, they didn't police this stuff as hard, but then they also didn't have to because there was just grass. So if you went off, you knew.
It's also self-policing, because if you see someone else going off, especially back in the day when it was a lot less monitored, you just see everyone else would just do it, and you wouldn't gain any advantage from it.
I mean, admittedly, there was a period about 20 years ago when they were completely ignored, because we've seen the laps from the Red Bull Ring, like turn one, they're just going completely off through the runoff because they're told they're allowed to.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, then why even have the track boundaries if they're allowed to? Because that's a very flagrant violation. That rather than usually track limits, it's like, oh, the car's oversteered a bit and I got slightly wide and I've gone just outside. It's like, is that really an advantage? But taking an entirely new line at full speed obviously is, and one that isn't on the track completely.
I don't really care what the track limits rules are, as long as they're defined. It's like, for example, in NASCAR, I love the NASCAR rules because if it's paved, you can go on it, and if it's grass, you can't. Pretty simple. On F1, obviously, it's like white lines and stuff like that. Obviously, that's a lot more of it's a lot less easy to gauge, especially when it's like 1 millimeter and stuff. But just do what they have at Bahrain or Austria, where there's gravel, like less than a car's width away from the edge of a track. So if you do, you can't go all the way off without hitting gravel or grass.
And maybe make the rumble strips a bit smaller as well. It's wider than the cars, which are already wide enough as it is.
Yes.
Just so much stuff that needs to be done on that side. But if we look at Haas, well, kind of the inverse of Alpine, a good recovery weekend because Behrman. Wasn't it? He started last, didn't he? And he couldn't get the laps in. I can't remember what happened with him, but
he struggled with the brakes all weekend in practice and in qualifying. He struggled with the brakes. He couldn't stop locking up, essentially.
Oh, okay, so just bad lap, and then Ocon crashes, does a Mazepin, and crashes. But even so, they both got themselves into the points. So Haas they're in a position where even though they're having crappy weekends, they can still kind of make lemonade from lemons and make things work. And it's because like a year ago or 2 years ago under Gunter, they would have done that and just finished at the back with fucking Sauber and Aston Martin.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some improvement, I guess, with the pace of their car recently, and strategy calls went their way. Ocon just pitted so early, and as Ace mentioned at the beginning, he undercut so many cars, and then he stayed out when that safety car came out, and that propelled him to even higher positions. And credit to him, he held off others for P8. Behrman also pitted under the softs, for the softs under the safety car, and he had a lot of pace too, despite being pressured by Albon and Antonelli. So, two things: Haas is a good car; it's not a bad car; it's quite fast, and the drivers drove really well this weekend, and that's what they need going forward. So it's nice to see a nice bounce back race from Haas after recent disappointments.
Yeah, I keep thinking that this Haas car is exactly like it was at the end of last year, which was very good on race pace, on race management, on tire management, and then it was kind of weaker on qualifying. And so this just got enhanced because the field got much closer in qualifying. And so in qualifying, the Haas does not stand out, but then in the race, it is an extremely good car in race pace. And so I think that's just what we have been seeing throughout the year in China, then in Japan. Japan, no, because the strategy didn't exist. But China and now Bahrain, we saw that the Haas was making up places easily in the race.
Yeah, it's a good car, and they have made improvements. So onwards and upwards for them. Another team that's made some improvements is Williams. What did we think about Williams? Because the way I saw it, they had a great start with Sainz. He was like sixth. He couldn't really keep that pace, could he? He dropped out of the top 10 pretty quickly, and then he got a 10 place or 10-second time penalty after his defensive blocks against Antonelli, and then he got into two separate incidents with Tsunoda. So I mean, at the end of the day, and then Albon really didn't, he didn't really threaten the points until the very end because he had to run that hard tire right in the middle stint. So no points for either driver, but at one point they were sixth. I gotta say, this was a bit of a missed opportunity for Williams. What do you guys think?
I mean, Albon, well, he should have made it into Q2 because then that got the track limits thing for Hülkenberg like an hour later. So otherwise, he would have been in Q2 and maybe off of that could have made Q3. But Sainz, the car is just falling apart again because that debris that safety car was completely unnecessary. That was a virtual safety car any day. That came off Sainz's car because there's a massive hole in the side pod. And so, the Williams is still just made of glass. But it wasn't. It was just a bad weekend in the sense that everything going wrong for them again. And Sainz has had a really, really rotten start to this when I thought he was going to annihilate Albon, and nothing is working. And he got a point in China, but that was off the back of a triple disqualification. And you feel bad, and it's just Williams is just depressing. Because it feels like they've moved nowhere since 2022 now, and the car looks basically the same as well. And we're just going to keep going around this cycle of, it's like, we need to stop using fucking Windows XP for all of our data, and the car's crashed again, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, when are they going to sort themselves out? Or maybe stop calling themselves Williams eventually as the connection with Williams drifts further and further apart. I don't know. It's just, they're just annoying now.
Yeah.
I actually believe that Williams overall is the best midfielder car. It's just that at each racetrack, the performance varies and the midfield is close enough that at each individual race, it is never the straight-up best, usually. So in China, the straight-up best was the Haas. In Japan, the Racing Bulls. Here it was the Alpine. And only in Australia you could say that the Williams was the best midfielder car. But overall, the Williams has always been competitive. If it wasn't the best, it was either the second best midfielder, and only here in Bahrain it was the third best midfielder behind Alpine and Haas. And honestly, you gotta say that yesterday in the race, they basically helped their rivals more than they helped themselves, because with everything that Albon and Sainz did holding up the front runners, they just bought time for Berman, for Ocon, for Gasly, and so it helped them to finish in the position they finished, and they scored nothing. So it's kind of interesting to notice that this happened with Williams. But anyway, I think the car is good for a midfielder, and that they are the best overall midfield car.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know if I agree with the best overall midfield car, but they've made some improvements, unlike some other teams we're about to talk about. So, anything else on that, or should we just move on to Sauber?
The only thing we haven't mentioned is Sainz's hole in his car that forced him to retire. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
he already had a penalty before that, didn't he? Or he got another one, and they were like, "I'll just give up."
Yes.
Probably.
but the hole in the car, was that from contact with Tsunoda?
Yeah, and that's the one that
yes.
that was the debris as well, where that came from.
Okay. So whose fault was that, do we think,
I didn't
for
see
the
it.
record?
Because
Yeah.
it's Tsunoda, I'm inclined to say Tsunoda. But yeah.
I don't think any of us
I
have
mean-
actually seen the incident.
I mean, my take on that is, I mean, Ace, do you have a take on that before I give my thoughts on that, or?
I tend
because
to agree with Peter that it was more Yuki than Carlos.
So this is what I think. This incident was totally avoidable, and when you look at it, Tsunoda was already just out of control coming out of the corner, turn 3, and like it's completely his fault. He lost the car exiting turn 1, and then he touched signs. So, that's a pretty big mistake that he made, and I don't know. I feel like that got a little bit underreported because that effectively ruined Sainz's race. So Tsunoda, he's got to clean up his act a little bit. Like, you can't be running into Williams's when you're driving a Red Bull. That's a joke. So I definitely agree with Peter and Ace that it was Tsunoda's fault, and I think he got away with it lightly because it was a big mistake. Cost Sainz quite a bit. So, anyways, moving on from that, Sauber. This team is a
Sauber was
joke.
actually the yes, precisely because Hülkenberg did finish 13th, but he's disqualified now.
Yeah, no, this team is a disgrace, and on multiple fronts. First of all, how many weird disqualifications, infringements can you have in 4 races? I've lost count. And if it's not the team messing up the technical regulations, it's Hülkenberg not putting in the quality laps, or in the race something else happening. I mean, if I look at this weekend, Hülkenberg got his lap deleted, and then he effectively dropped down to 16th in quali after qualifying 13th. And then in the race, his car failed the post-race inspection because the plank wear was found to be in breach of the regulations. So then he was just completely disqualified. And if you look at his weekend, he had a terrible start. So he ended up last by turn 4. So then he pitted early and super aggressively and ran 2 very long stints, and then got disqualified in the end. It was a joke. It was just such a bad performance by both drivers, especially Nico. Honestly, I think Nico was really disappointing this weekend. So yeah, this team is just awful. But they weren't even the slowest car this weekend. They were the second slowest. But it's just not good enough. You can't perform like this in Formula One. It's not good enough.
Yeah, nothing more to add, honestly. Yes, they under-delivered because they should have beaten the Aston, and of course Lawson, who made a mess of his weekend, but we will cover it later. And even in qualifying, they were basically both out in Q1 because yes, Nico did get to the Q2, but then his last lap in Q1 got the leader, so he got demoted. Anyway, aside from that mess, neither Sauber made it out of Q1, and then in the race they finished last. So the one time they should have beaten a team and they could, they didn't. So that's very disappointing. Bortoleto was another weekend, of course, not on Nico's pace, but close enough to him. So that bodes well for him, given nobody will ever notice any good or bad performance all the way back there.
I agree with that. And speaking, Nedzo, Peter, do you have anything else to add to that?
Not really. Yeah, not really.
Their pace is better, I guess. Like in that they can keep up with the field, or they can keep up with Aston Martin. That's one thing to take away from it. But yeah, they'll be like 5th fastest in Qatar, but otherwise don't expect anything else for the rest of the season.
And speaking of the rest of the season, I think Liam Lawson is somebody that will want to improve for the rest of the season because he's just not had a good season at all, has he? Both at Red Bull and at Racing Bulls. And that brings us to that team, Racing Bulls in general. They did not have their best weekend. Ajar had a bad start, if I remember correctly. And he pitted before the safety car, and he lost a ton of times because everyone else got the free stop. So Ajar was a bit unlucky and not a great start. And then Lawson was just I don't know what's happening to this guy. He looked more impressive last season. He hit Stroll, or he had a collision with him, and then he got a 5-second penalty for that, and then he got another one after he hit Hülkenberg. So Liam's got to really pull himself together here. This is not the driver that we saw last season, and not the driver that had confidence to go wheel to wheel with Fernando Alonso and Kota and really show people he was not that afraid of anybody. He just looks like a mess right now, and I think it's because of a lack of continuity. He doesn't have familiarity with the Red Bull, and he doesn't have familiarity with this year's Racing Bulls yet. So I'm tempted to give him a few more races before judging him any further.
Same, I give Lawson a grace period of at least the summer break, honestly, because he needs that time. And also the car, it's clear that the Racing Bull is a good midfield car. But it depends on the track. Here in Bahrain, the Racing Bulls was 8th best car and was honestly just ahead of Sauber and Aston, but it could not challenge the Williams, the Alpine, the Haas. It just couldn't. The car isn't good enough to do that here in Bahrain. It was the best car back in Japan. So I think, first of all, the Racing Bulls heavily relies on the track to be competitive. And as a consequence, I think we should have an extended grace period for Lawson, because clearly he has some kind of huge struggle for having been dropped after 2 races, and then a new car, which his teammate, who's a rookie, has more experience with. Tarjar, honestly, where did he finish? 13th?
Yeah.
That's where the car should have finished.
I agree with that. So, and anything else to add, team, on Racing Bulls, or should we go to the last team?
I think we can move on
And-
to him finally.
We can move on to
So,
Aston,
yeah.
I guess.
I'll let you guys start off with this one. I need to bite my tongue when I speak about this team and their despicable drivers. So, why don't you start it off?
So, this car, just like the Racing Bulls, heavily relies on the track, because the Aston did not look great at all in testing. The Sauber looked like a proper back marker back in Bahrain in February, but then they improved, and so they were no longer a back marker, they were just a bad midfielder car. The Aston instead just looked like what it was back in testing. And to be honest, they brought no upgrades since then, so that's to be expected. I think that the car is basically bad everywhere, but in particular at low speed corners. And so it cannot go over the curves. It dies mid corner. The car suffers from a massive mid turn understeer problem. And then it also is bad in traction. And so it means that car is very bad in low speed corners. And just overall, it isn't good anyway. So that's where the Aston stands. Back in Japan, they did a perfectly executed weekend, and they were 11th. This weekend, they were barely in Q2, and that was already incredible, honestly, because they were in Q2 because of the way Alonso executed qualifying. Like, Alonso was on the pace by lap 2 in Q1. Who else was on the limit of the car by lap 2 in Q1 on Saturday? No one else. And that's the reason.
Michael, Emi, Mika. Oh, sorry, the wrong year. But anyways, yeah. I mean, Alonso drove well in qualifying. There's no doubt about
In
it.
qualifying.
He did. There's no doubt. He was 13th in the slowest car, so we give him credit for that.
Yes, and in the race, he got kind of screwed over by the safety car, because he was gonna do medium, both extended stints to go on the soft on the last stint. And so the safety car came out early enough that he couldn't go for the new soft tire he had. He had to go for the hard tire. And as we know, the hard tire was the worst tire on race day, so nothing more. At the restart, he went too deep into turn 1, lost lots of places, and that was the race. He finished 15th instead of 13th place, but it made absolutely no difference, honestly. The car is bad. It is especially bad in Bahrain. It will be especially bad at Monaco, Singapore, and another racetrack, probably Hungary. And really, what the team is waiting for is the upgrade that will come either at Imola or at Barcelona, because this upgrade will be entirely completed in their new wind tunnel. And so if it works, you know that they just had a massive problem with the wind tunnel. If it doesn't, you know the massive problem is with the team itself. And so there will be no newie by 2026 if the problem is the team itself and not the wind tunnel. So literally at this point, we'll just wait Imola or Barcelona to see what the upgrade does, and we'll have our answer of how competitive Aston will be in 2026.
At this point, I feel like if the car doesn't improve, Alonso may just retire at the end of this year, because it's going so badly. It's like, well, what's the point of continuing? And he's someone who is, he's fairly open about when he doesn't care or when things are not going well. Is that only if he has assurance that Adrian Newey is building him a rocket ship will he stay at this point, I think.
I will just. I'll just say that I don't think Alonso, regardless of how bad the car gets, will leave, because I know it's the most Alonso thing to do, but I think he's finally learned that to leave a team before they have a potential great car coming along would be stupid. Although I still think that a 45-year-old Alonso will be worse in a championship fight than a motivated Lance Stroll.
No, the problem, I agree with you in principle, Nedzo, that Alonso probably won't leave, but Lance Stroll is like, I'm aghast of the way he's been driving the past 2 weekends. Like, it's like he doesn't care. His interviews are so flippant. It's like he just says 2 words and leaves. And people keep saying like, "Oh yeah, man, he was running these experimental setups." Like, my answer to that is, has he been running experimental setups for his entire career? Because that's what it looks like. I mean, he's so bad, Nedzo. I mean, how do you really think if he was motivated, he could beat Alonso in a title fight? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just curious to know your rationale for that.
Well, okay, so basically, the first part of it is Alonso, and I believe that Alonso now is not on the level he was even like 2023, for example. I think,
Sure,
like every single, like, this is the thing with Alonso. You see these magical performances like once in a year. Baku 2018, like the Canada 2022 qualifying, Qatar 21, and Hungary. Some other things he did there, and then like the couple of podiums at the start of 23, and then Brazil 23. We haven't had one of those like golden Alonso moments since Brazil 2023. And I think that either means that he's just not been in the car to be able to prove anything, and that the car is completely hampering is holding him back and handicapping him, or he's just lost that final edge of speed that he's always had. The second part of that is Lance Stroll, for me, is a motivation-led driver who performs well when he is motivated. And you've just mentioned yourself, he's very flippant, very bored, and he has been like 2023. You could see a marked downturn in his mental projections, and he's in 2024 as well. Like, for example, in 2020, when the car was 2020 was the best car he ever had, the tracing point, and for a long time he was fourth in the standings and ahead of Perez. Across the year, in the races they both finished without issue, he was ahead of Perez by 10 seconds. And we all know, yes, Perez nowadays is pretty much a last resort for any team who's going to select him, like a Cadillac or something. But back in 2020, Perez was a very, very solid midfield driver and arguably top 5 on the grid. And Stroll was better than him across the season in his best car of his career. I think that given championship aspirations, and that's an even bigger motivation than he's ever had, and with the support of obviously he's going to get a bit of favoritism from a team because Lawrence Stroll is his boss. I think that Stroll would not just because of the favoritism, but because of even just on pure merit, I think he'd get the title over Alonso in 2026. Because unless Alonso does the same thing and with motivation and stuff comes back from a couple of years in the doldrums, I think that Stroll has proven in his shorter time in his career, like 2017, 2020 points, that he's been able, when he's motivated, to prove himself at the top level.
I commend you for that. That's an interesting explanation and rationale. I am hesitant to jump on board with that because I just have such little faith in Lance Stroll.
That's fair enough.
Believe me, Nedzo, I think your rationale is really strong. So I hadn't thought about how good he was, right, in that tracing point. You're right. Over that season, he probably was better than Perez, wasn't he? So, I mean, yeah, there's every reason to think he could turn it up when the car is good, and his dad will definitely favor him. But so far, I just see Alonso as having a slight edge. Ultimately, this team has so many issues. They just don't seem to be able to like improve in a way that other teams do. Ace, do you have any thoughts on this?
That I must disagree with Nedzo's rationale, in the sense that I believe that, like any other driver, a driver's performance, that magical moment he speaks of, depends on the car. And if the car is good, it behaves well and is competitive, then the driver can deliver that magical moment, as Alonso did in Canada 2022 and the first podiums in Aston a few years ago, as Gasly did yesterday with the Alpine, because clearly he would not have finished 7th if the Alpine wasn't competitive, but at the same time he drove a flawless race. Why that happened? Because the Alpine was a good car yesterday. You give a good car to Gasly and he's going to give you a magical performance. If the car is competitive, either you don't have a magical performance or you cannot distinguish it from an average result. You get the same with Alonso. When was the last time he had a properly good car that behaved well? It was probably Brazil. Yes, Brazil 2023. And that was the last magical performance Alonso did. And so next time if he'll have a competitive car, maybe he's too old and he won't have a magical performance anymore. Or maybe he's not old enough, he's still competitive, and next time he has a competitive car, he will give the magical performance. Same can be talked about Stroll. In 2020, the Racing Point was a very good car, it behaved well, and so the drivers could push. Stroll could push, was confident, and confident Lance Stroll was a good driver that deserved to be in Formula One. Since 2020, when did Lance have a properly good car? So, of course, half a year in 2023, but that was he had a problem, he had an incident, so he didn't have as much testing with the car, and so it was on the back foot. And so when he actually caught up with experience, and the car had dropped off. So yes, Lance Stroll was good as long as he had a good car. And since then, he didn't have a good car, so he hasn't been a good driver. I think that's the key to really look at these results. That either the car is so bad you cannot distinguish an amazing performance from an average one, or that the driver to deliver a very good performance needs a very good car. Not even competitively, but at least that it behaves well. The Aston does not behave well. Mid-corner understeer. It cannot ride over the curves. Awful traction out of the corners. That car should not be anywhere near behaving well. And you see that with the drivers. Probably looking back at it now, what Alonso did in Japan was very impressive, and you cannot distinguish it from an average result. The P11, I cannot in good faith say that the Aston was the worst car in Japan. To me, it simply wasn't. It was everything best. I explained it finished so high up because half of the drivers in the midfield cars had awful qualifying, and probably there was no recovery from qualifying. So I think that was the key to that race, that P11th was more out of the circumstances than out of a magical performance. But honestly, at this point, the car is so bad, you cannot distinguish it. I cannot in good faith say anymore that it was a magical performance, nor say that it was an average result. That's where the car stands. You cannot judge the drivers based on that, in my opinion. So how the dynamics between Lance and Fernando will be next year if the car is good and competitive, I cannot say anymore because there is no data I can use that is not 2 years old by now.
Perfectly summed up. I'll just say that if Kimi Raikkonen's car hadn't broken down in the 2005 San Marino Grand Prix, Fernando Alonso would not have won that race. He just wouldn't have. And his most iconic moments and everything that everyone talks about him would be. No, I mean, look, he's a great driver, and my problem is this, and just being serious for a moment before we wrap this up, and I really mean this. Is he really the right driver for a team like this? Because I feel like he gets so angry and annoyed, even at this stage in his career, that he doesn't give the team the confidence that they need to really do well. Like, people were saying his radio message in qualifying was, some people were saying it was sarcasm. I don't know if it was. Maybe he genuinely believed he maximized everything because he has the slowest car, but you just feel like he's really frustrated and things are starting to boil over. And I've just never seen him as the driver you bring into a team that's struggling and needs to become good. He does better when the car is already good and all he has to do is just go fast, contrary to what people think. What do you think about that, Ace?
Absolutely true. I think that okay. So yes, it's exactly as you say. Alonso is a better driver when the car is good, and he only has to drive it. And as long as he does that, he does an excellent job. When he has to help a team improve, Alonso never really looked very good at it. I also should add that at this point, he still has not lashed out, never so far at Aston since he joined the team. He never lashed out. He never said this team is garbage. This is everything wrong. He never said that. The most controversial thing he said on the radio were most often taken out of context. When he was saying in a free practice in Abu Dhabi last year that he never drove a car worse than that, he was speaking about the balance and the precise setup. He wasn't just talking about the car in general. He was talking about a setup they trialed in free practice. An example, in free practice this weekend, Russell also said, I never had less grip than this moment in my life. He wasn't saying that the car was the worst he ever driven. It was that the setup must have been awful. So I think that as long as Fernando can avoid this lashing out with the team, can avoid this disruptive behavior, and he has done that so far, then Fernando is a driver good enough for a struggling team. Simply because there are many better choices. I mean, you could have Sainz. Who else could you have? As long as you are not actively hindering the team with your comments, you're doing a good enough job for a struggling team. You see that Alonso last year several times was testing setups just to help the team. Lance is doing it now. Neither is lashing out against the team. So yeah, I guess this lineup is good enough for Aston Martin. If Alonso will start to lash out as he did in the past at McLaren and Ferrari against the team, then at the moment he won't be worthy of this team anymore.
Yeah, agreed with that. Totally agreed. And I don't have anything else to add to Aston at this point.
So I guess we can move on to the top 3 and flop 3. Okay, I guess.
So tops
You want to
then.
go first, Peter? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter, who are your top 3 drivers?
Well, Oscar, George, and I guess Behrman. Bottoms, yeah, that was
Yeah, why not? It's a pretty good top 3. You could maybe put Ocon in, but why not? Just give it to Behrman. Held off a couple quicker cars, didn't he? So I agree with that.
I'd say my top 3 is Gasly, Piastri, and I am undecided between George and Charles. I guess George because he got a podium.
Okay.
I mean, in the last stint, Charles was on hard tires. If he was on a different compound, I think he would have finished second. It's just that the strategy Ferrari went for forced him to have the hard tire at the end. And so, yeah, of course he fell back. But overall, he was very competitive. He drove a very good race.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd go for George P1, Oscar P2, and Behrman P3.
In terms of flops, well, Lando, Lawson, and I guess Hülkenberg.
Yeah, that's my flop 3 as well.
My flop 3 is gonna be Lawson, Aston, and Sauber.
Okay.
I guess I'll go for number 1. It will probably be Aston Martin. Number 2 will be Lando. Number 3 will be Lawson.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add.
A lot of continuity then between the 4 of us with that, but
yes,
it's hardly surprising. I mean, the
Bahrain
is
tops are obvious.
Yes, yeah, it's one of those things. Bahrain rarely produces like chaotic races where you're just like, what happened? I can't even remember. It's always pretty bog standard, even when they're good ones. And this, yeah,
because it
this
doesn't
was no
rain.
exception.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I mean, it would have been, I think, because it was so much better than Japan. Otherwise, it would have just been kind of okay, because there have been better races in Bahrain, certainly, but also lots of really crap ones.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was an average race that was made to look better because of how bad Japan was, and also because there were some interesting tire strategies and maneuvers. Last lap pass of Verstappen on Gasly, so I'd give it a 6.5 or 7 out of 10. That's my rating for the race. And yeah, not too bad, but not a classic.
Yeah, I mean, something we didn't mention, there seems to have been general problems up at race control over the weekend as well, with the timings, the transponders, because we had a period of like there were no timings on screen, and then George was retired at one point, even though he was running in second, and this happened around the same time that his DRS wasn't working, and then Leclerc's wasn't working either. So that something's gone funny with the infrastructure at the circuit and the way the transponders interact, because that was a bit odd.
Yeah. No, it was weird. I think the FIA and it's too busy finding people for swearing to care about that, I guess. But ultimately, yeah, there's just things they have to clean up for the rest of the season. F1 is too big a sport to have those mistakes happen consistently. So, but yeah, no, overall decent weekend, and I think next weekend should be ostensibly even better given the history of that circuit. So it'd be good.
I disagree.
Close champion. Oh, you do, huh?
I
Okay.
honestly think that the next, this Sunday, because today is Monday, this Sunday we will have the most boring race you can imagine. It will be Japan all over. Just no tire being better than the other, no degradation, because at Jeddah there was never any degradation. So just the most boring race you can ever imagine. Unless someone
Well,
suddenly crashes, like Lance
yeah.
Stroll going in the barriers for a...
Well, Doohan and Lawson crashing is kind of a given, I think, next weekend. Whether it's in practice or the race, we'll have to see. But...
What worries me is what we talked about at the beginning, is that if the safety car hadn't come out in this race, I have a feeling this race would have also been garbage. So, yeah, it could be that we're going to see a couple of races here if there are no major incidents that are a bit processional, but I always just look at Jeddah as a unpredictable race because of what you everyone here mentioned. So easy to crash at that circuit. So I'm going to keep my hopes up, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a procession, frankly. But we'll see.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out next week with the third of this, the first triple header of the year, to see how things go in Jeddah. You've been listening to the DRS Train Podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify. You can find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train Podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.